This is the health economics lecture for community medicine for 2026. So at the end of this session, you are expected as a student to be able to understand and analyze the health economic situation of the Philippines, understand how economics is applied to the study of health and the healthcare, how economics relates to other considerations within the health sector, explain health financing, including the various modes of payment, and how it is evaluated based on efficiency and effectiveness. Be familiar with the different terms of health economics and some economic terms in general, and differentiate the multiple forms of economic evaluation. And finally, identify any knowledge gaps and do self directed learning as needed. Health economics is a very challenging uh, it's a very challenging subject, particularly for those of us who did not graduate with a liberal arts degree. Okay, for those of us who did not take Econ 11 or even basic economics in high school. Okay, but basically the premise of economics is that resources are scarce and choices have to be made in how we generate those resources and how they are allocated. From a health viewpoint, we know that there are many diseases or conditions that need to be addressed as a society, as a community, and even as your the administrator of your own little health facility. And we have to identify which ones need to be prioritized using an economic lens. Okay, which diseases can we afford to address given the budget that we have? And the lesson mainly with regards to this subject is health economics usually is about saving money and spending less, okay? But that shouldn't be what it boils down to, what it is in the real world, okay? Health economics is basically using the least amount of money for the most amount of returns. Okay? Because the saved money can go somewhere else, although inevitably we know whose pockets that saved money goes to. Okay? But we're already veering away from the lecture. So, health economics should be about maximizing benefits. So, a great analogy for this is an electronic device upgrade, which I am currently facing right now. Okay, my tablet computer is basically screaming to be upgraded, and you ask yourself, where are you going to get the money? Okay, so you're a medical student. Do you rely on your allowance? Do you do side jobs during the weekends or in the evenings? Do you have racket or commissions if you're an artist or if you have talent in arts or in music? Or do you take a salary if you are, for example, already a medical professional, okay? And you have an allocated budget of 100,000 pesos. So your choices, for example, with regards to your mobile phone, is either an Android or an iPhone. With the tablet, you could choose between Windows 11, Android, or an iPad OS device. So it's either an iPad, iPad Air, iPad Mini. Okay. And for your computer, you have to decide if you're going to get a PC versus Mac OS. And for PC, is it a Windows machine or a Linux machine? Are you going to get a mini PC or a full desktop computer that you can upgrade so you will assemble by yourself versus a laptop? Or are you going to go my route, which is I have two portable gaming computers. So one, the Lenovo Legion Go when I need to use Windows software, and a Steam Deck when I prefer to be secure in my connection to the internet, okay, because of the Linux platform. And then you ask yourself, are you buying this brand new versus secondhand? And then also consider the accessories. You need to buy phone cases, you need to buy bags, you need to buy phone stands or tablet stands, spare chargers, and even keyboards if you're going to buy a tablet computer. Same way, for 10 million pesos, a small community can upgrade or renovate one barangay health station to regulatory specifications, as what happened in Pasig City. Purchase and equip two to three, and yes, there's a question mark because depending on who the bidders are, the price of per unit of an ambulance as well as the equipment for it can vary wildly. Okay, I have seen bidding documents where the ambulances are only 2 or 3 million pesos each, and sometimes as much as 5 or 6 million pesos. Okay, and then you can finance the treatment cost of 4 to 5 patients with breast or colorectal cancer, including the surgical options and the surgical modalities, as well as the adjuvant chemotherapy treatments, the cycles that you will need. Okay, but consider also that this is for the private sector, might be cheaper uh, for the government services, but in private, I believe this can finance the treatment of at least four patients. Okay, and then for 10 million pesos, you could also purchase all the vaccines for the National Immunization Program, flu vaccines for everyone, and vaccines against human papilloma virus, plus change for a community of 20,000 people. And for that same price, you can fund public health campaigns for early screening and disease prevention, and again, still have change. However, in the real world, we cannot make these distinct choices. Okay, all these five choices aren't mutually exclusive. There will always be cancer patients and patients that require chronic care. There will be barangay health stations that will need renovations, especially in areas that are prone to natural hazards. Okay, I didn't say natural disasters because there is no such thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards. Okay, and ambulances need to be maintained and resupplied. So going back once again to health economics, resources are limited, the needs are many, and there are many advocacies and as well as many advocates pushing for those advocacies. And what we need and what we can afford are often two very different things. So when we look at this glass, for example, through an optimist's lens, the glass is half full. From a pessimist's lens, it's half empty. But to an economist, the glass is not optimized to do its job of carrying a beverage. Okay, it is only, yeah, it is not being efficient. Health economists will argue that health economics is not about saving money, nor the means of exchange for health services, nor is about nor is it about accountancy or monitoring of financial transactions. Instead, it is acknowledging that everyone, including our society, including our leadership, with regards to health, has choices. And economics makes these choices more explicit and ideally more transparent. So, health economics boils down to being concerned with the costs, the resource use, the benefits, the choice, and the efficiency. If you get option A, will the benefits outweigh the costs? And if the answer to that is yes, it is efficient. If not, it is inefficient. As a subset of the discipline of economics, health economics also has its own subspecialties. So you have your descriptive or positive economics. So descriptive is gathering and presenting factual data such as the expenditure, the demand, the supply, the market movements. And then you have your normative economics, which is either predictive or evaluative. So for predictive, like statistics, it is inferential. It uses models, trends, sometimes even machine learning, and big data to forecast economic events. Closely linked to this is your evaluative economics, which does systematic comparative analysis of the costs and outcomes or consequences of different interventions and the choices and policies to aid in decision making, especially with resource allocation. Normative economics are prescriptions for what individuals or societies should take or not take as actions. And when I say prescriptions, yes, sort of how doctors prescribe to patients. In economics, they like to use the word utility a lot, which is the level of quote unquote happiness that results from consumption. So, health is one component of this utility, but it is not the sole objective of the market's behavior, of consumer behavior. And there are always trade offs. So, the more we spend on health, there is less money on infrastructure, on education, on social services, on law enforcement, on the military. And with health economics, the discipline of economics is basically just applied to health. So, healthcare economics, goods and services produced by the health sector, primarily affecting health status and outcomes. And with that, we land with the health economics map. So, we define health, and you have been defining that since your first year as medical students, or even before that, if you are a licensed health professional. But now, from an economic lens, we look at the value of health either monetarily or from a market perspective. What influences health, especially other than healthcare? What is the market demand for healthcare? What is the supply, the market supply of healthcare? And then you look at it through economic evaluation, and it is balanced by our planning, our budgeting, and the regulatory mechanisms, and then macroeconomic and microeconomic appraisals. So, for the value of health, people are reduced to units of labor or income. Okay, so they are either produce labor or they produce goods or services, or they are sources of extraction of value of revenue. Okay. And in health economics, we talk about quality adjusted life years, which is basically the benefit of a medical intervention, which equals to quality of life multiplied by the length of life. If a benefit of a medical intervention is yeah, it's equal to the quality of life times the length of life, and one quali equals 1 year of perfect health. On the flip side, we have the disability adjusted life years, okay, where it is basically years lived with disability plus years of life lost. And the years lived with disability equals the number of incident cases in the population times the disability weight of the condition. There is usually an adjusted weight for these conditions, okay? And the average duration of a case until remission or death. Okay, so think about a patient who had a stroke and then who had global aphasia. Okay, so what is the number of incident cases in the population for those with cerebrovascular disease? what is the disability rate of global aphasia because of stroke, and the average duration of the case, so global aphasia until remission or death. Okay? And then the years of life lost equals number of deaths due to the condition, okay, so stroke, and then the standard life expectancy at age of death for a country. This is specific to a particular country. So this is a table of your disability rate or for the value of health. Okay. Okay. There are other influences on health other than healthcare itself. So, for example, the price of food, particularly what is considered healthy food and what is considered unhealthy food. Okay. The environment. Okay. If you have or if you live in a community where vehicles are encouraged to be used, you're not going to be incentivized or you're not going to naturally be inclined to walk for kilometers, which is a far cry from other from our Asian neighbors from other countries in the world. Okay, and then other influence include the price of vices or even the price of healthcare. Okay, but that all is already healthcare. But the price of vices, including the price of cigarettes, the price of vapes, the price of alcoholic beverages, factor into whether a person is going to drink regularly, to smoke. So because of we can actually attribute the additional excise taxes on cigarettes as to why people in general are less likely to start smoking these days. Another influence on health aside from the price of food is the accessibility of healthy options. Sure, you have um, food security. Sure, you have fresh vegetables and fruits. But if these fresh vegetables or fruits are only available in our rural areas and cannot make the trip to our urban areas, that's also going to affect the health of our city dwellers. Work hours, okay? The list is endless, okay? So if you have long work hours, especially when you are a medical resident, there is no incentive unless you live with another person, okay, for you to eat healthier meals, okay, for you to eat home cooked meals, okay. And then also there is to take a term from your generation, vibes, okay. While economics generally accepts that human beings are rational, okay, we are rational creatures. In reality, other social scientists will tell you that we are a fundamentally irrational lot who will follow trends despite it being harmful and not necessarily pleasant, including, for example, that trend of looks maxing. Okay? And for those of you who either have a minor or even took up economics as an undergraduate degree, you yeah, you understand this much easily than I do, which is the supply and demand of healthcare. So the demand side is usually the patients or sometimes the communities or the National Health Agency, which will pay for health commodities and health services. And things to consider about market demand is their level of income or their socioeconomic levels. Whereas the supply of healthcare, aside from our doctors and allied health workers, also includes the equipment manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies, the the reagents. Okay, so the reagents that are needed for the machines that do laboratory testing or for our imaging modalities. Okay, So in economics, we have our supply and demand curves as seen here. So the blue line is our demand curve, okay? So according to our classical economics, the higher the price, the lower the demand, okay? So the quantity of our demand is higher, okay? So it goes higher when the price is low. Whereas with regards to our suppliers, the supply becomes higher if the price is higher, okay? And there is an equilibrium point where the price is determined based on where the demand and where the market, okay, and the suppliers have basically agreed that this is an acceptable price point. However, this is usually seen for elastic goods, this classic demand and supply curves. For inelastic goods, so when we think of elastic goods, these are usually the luxuries, okay, or things that we cannot we can live without. Inelastic goods, on the other hand, such as utilities, water, or internet access, demand is stable even with price changes. Okay, so with electricity, you're not going to have a lower demand even um, when the uh, when the price is high. Even petroleum, which we've seen rise over the past 2 months, there's still a relatively high demand because people need petroleum to travel to get to work to make a living. Okay, same with water. Okay, and even with our internet access. Okay, as somebody, of course, who has a small food production business, I have noticed the supply curve itself. I've noticed that yeah, at the price point that I am selling the food that I produce, there is generally I have reached the equilibrium point. Okay, it's an acceptable price for my target market. But if I raise it, there will be a much lower demand because the food that I produce is only popular during Christmas, where they are sold in bulk, or during Valentine's Day, where suitors or significant others would give or other people would give it to their significant others. Okay, and now we ask the question: is healthcare itself an elastic or an inelastic good? Does it respond dramatically to changes in price? Now, here's the thing. You might think that healthcare is an inelastic good. We need healthcare to survive. However, it depends on where you are in the world. So let's go to the next slide. Depending on how healthcare is mostly financed in your country, the demand curve for healthcare usually follows either an elastic or an inelastic curve. Okay, so an elastic curve means healthcare is treated as a luxury, while an inelastic curve, as I mentioned in the previous slide, means it is something you need to survive. Now, if you live in a country where it's mostly private health insurance or health maintenance organizations that are your source of payment for health services, do you think it is an elastic curve or an inelastic curve? If you have socialized health insurance and national health insurance, and yes, there is a difference between those two, okay? One taxes the corporations, okay? The other is taken from general revenue from income taxes, okay? So there's your yeah, more than likely in this case, if people think that the payment is not coming from their pockets, even though they're really paying for it, it's really through taxes, okay? But if they aren't feeling it in their take home income, healthcare becomes an inelastic good. But if it's an out of pocket payment, it becomes more of it. Yeah, it behaves more like an elastic good. Okay. So with regards to private health insurance and health maintenance organizations, do you think that it will behave more like an elastic good or an inelastic good, considering that premiums do increase the more you use the insurance or the HMO? Okay. And another thing we need to consider when we talk about supply and the demand and agency in health economics is what are the roles of the health workers, particularly the doctors, and the roles of the patients. Do doctors exist so that the patient can give all of the information during history taking for the doctor to then give therapeutic options for the patient to decide and implement? Or do patients exist so that the doctor can make the decision and the patient implements the decision once the doctor makes it? Okay. Consider also the MDRN phenomenon of the 2000s. So let's talk about health worker supply. So back when I was applying for medical school, there was a general dearth. Okay, so there was a general plunge in the number of applicants into medical school. Why? Because it was discovered that even when you were already a subspecialist, the income of an RN in another country may even be double the income of an MD here in the Philippines. Okay? And so the DOH, to try to alleviate this, launched the precursor of the MSRS, the Pinoy MD Scholarship Program. Okay? So, again, that's where the government goes in. So, for example, in economics, if there's going to be an economic crisis because of, say, the price of petrol rising, the government can institute regulations such as price caps or other measures to try to alleviate or even prevent an economic crisis because of rising prices of a particular inelastic good. And the same with the MDRN phenomenon, except this was more of a long-term effect. They were trying to replace those who had gone abroad to practice as registered nurses by by training a new batch of MDs and then saddling these MDs with contracts where they will serve as doctors to the barrios and then serve an additional 8 more years in the Philippines, okay, in various levels of the health sector, okay. And then let's talk about supply with regards to specialty practice. So for those of you who are aware or already know of what specialty you're going to take up after you get your license to practice, you are aware that in non-metro Manila cities and even in Metro Manila, there is competition. Okay, in Metro Manila, because there is a high demand, you could actually survive even if you are new to Metro Manila. Okay, whereas in cities outside of Metro Manila, certain specialists, particularly those that are in who do not have a one-to-one ratio with regards to care and patients. So think of yung diagnostic specialties. Think of the radiology, pathology. Think of your anesthesiologists who can partner up with multiple surgeons. Okay, they can box out competition. Okay, this is my turf. And I already have the partners here, so it is difficult to establish a practice in a non-Metro Manila city if you are in that kind of specialty. Okay, and of course, no health economics lecture is complete without talking about the human resources for health situation in the Philippines that I briefly touched upon in the previous slide. But let's talk about it formally with the paradoxical oversupply of nurses in the Philippines. Okay? The Philippines itself has the paradox of having 240,000 nurses working abroad and 127,000 nurses are still needed locally. However, we do have an oversupply in that there is around 200 to 250,000 licensed registered nurses who are no longer practicing the profession. And not all of them are because they all took up medicine, okay? Some of them are in the BPO industry or in unrelated fields, okay? And it's not because it's just a matter of poor absorption, okay? Sometimes you consider also the factors such as the beginning salary of nurses. So last I heard, the beginning salary of a nurse in the government is around 20,000 pesos per month, and in the private sector around 14 to 16,000 pesos per month take home. So there are so many nurses, there is so much need, and yet why are we in this situation? Okay, so let's go to the next slide and let's talk about the cold hard economics of human resources for health through a macroeconomic appraisal. It all boils down to GDP, or the gross domestic product, versus the GNP, or the gross national product. So the gross domestic product, okay, it's an economic indicator where the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific period of time. It is a scorecard of economic health that does not take into account income inequality, volunteer work, black market activities, sustainability of economic health, and the environmental damage, and sustainability of economic growth. It treats replacement of depreciated capital as the creation of new capital, even though those two things are different. Okay? GDP, the equation for the GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. Okay? Whereas gross national product is basically GDP plus income earned from abroad minus the net income outflow to foreign countries. That is usually from our multinational companies on operating in the Philippines or foreigners working in the Philippines. Okay? The GNP is total monetary value of all income made by a country's residents or businesses, including from OFWs. This is taxable income. Okay? This is income that lets us invest in so many condominiums because the OFWs can afford it. Okay? Even though locally, only a small percentage of our population can afford these condominiums, and we have an 8.2-year oversupply of the of condominium units. When Filipinos earn more abroad than foreigners in the Philippines, our GNP is greater than the GDP. And that's why a lot of economists would rather use GNP even though GDP is more accepted as an economic indicator in other parts of the world. And yes, We are nothing more than units with which to extract labor or value from in the eyes of the powerful, the ultra-wealthy, and economists. Okay? So sadly, this paradoxical oversupply of nurses, it's not going to end soon. But of course, for macroeconomic appraisal, and this one you have to look up yourself to know the definitions, okay? We are not going to be spoon feeding. Look up the definition of the Human Development Index and the Better Life Index because these actually take into account the human experience rather than just the meaningless uh, figures of the GDP or the GNP. So when we make a decision from a top of society, from a government viewpoint, they always ask for the economic evaluation, okay? The economic repercussions um, of a certain choice, of a certain proposed intervention. They always make us do this when I used to be affiliated with the government, particularly with the blood services. So you have to do either a cost effectiveness analysis, a cost utility analysis, a cost benefit analysis, a cost minimization analysis, or a cost consequence analysis. So a cost effectiveness analysis is an economic evaluation where outcomes are expressed in health units such as life years saved. On the other hand, a cost utility analysis basically has outcomes are expressed in health units that capture not just the quantity but the quality of life. So utility equals, like I mentioned before, happiness slash satisfaction slash well-being. So, for example, you have two oral contraceptive pills, but one of them improves acne symptoms. You are more likely, as somebody with a uterus, if you have a uterus, going to take the oral contraceptive pills that improve acne symptoms. Okay? Whereas with cost benefit analysis, these are expressed purely in monetary terms. However, I understand that in healthcare, in medicine, we actually do cost benefit analysis, but the meaning is different, okay? Because they don't look at it in monetary terms, but other side effects of pharmacologic interventions, okay? And then you have your cost minimization analysis. So equally effective interventions are compared based on their costs. Okay. So for cost minimization analysis, consider consider the two procedures, okay, for removing the gallbladder. One will require admission into the hospital. The other is outpatient. Like after 6 hours, the patient can be discharged. Okay. So more than likely, from a cost minimization analysis, all things considered and all health outcomes the same, many people would choose the outpatient procedure. Okay. And cost consequence analysis, the last one, compares costs and consequences of different interventions. Okay, so the side effects, the toxic effects, but no summarization is done in a single measure or in financial terms. Okay, and then you have your economic evaluation. The slide, it compares the costs and consequences of different healthcare interventions to assess their value for money. And partner to that, when you have an economic evaluation, you also have to do a sensitivity analysis, which is the process of assessing the findings of an economic evaluation by varying the assumptions used in the analysis itself. So with regards to our economic evaluation, you have your average cost effectiveness ratio, which is basically your healthcare cost for a particular evaluation divided by the clinical outcome. So the total cost of a program or treatment alternative divided by its clinical outcome will yield a ratio representing the cost per specific clinical outcome gained. And it is independent of comparators or other alternative treatment modalities. Whereas with incremental cost effectiveness ratio, okay, the additional cost that a treatment alternative imposes over another treatment comparing with the additional effect, benefit, or outcome it provides. So it's basically comparative, okay, and yields a ratio of differential cost over the differential benefit. So the choice of economic evaluation usually is the cost utility analysis. It's the gold standard for economists and the best way to establish if something is effective. However, it is not always feasible. The choice of appropriate analysis will always depend on what intervention uh, is offered to people and by the health system, what is available. And again, like the example I proposed earlier about removing the gallbladder on an outpatient or on an admission basis, cost utility analysis is not appropriate. Cost minimization analysis is a better economic evaluator. And when you're doing an economic evaluation as a policymaker, you have to make a decision tree. So this is how you choose your interventions. So you have your general population somewhere here, the general population with the disease, and they have two, okay, in this example, two choices, intervention A or intervention B. And this is your chance node, okay? So if you take intervention A, they fall into the probability of becoming totally disease free, or there is partial treatment but they still live with the consequences of the disease. So think of, say, um, supportive treatment for smallpox rather than getting vaccinated, okay? So sometimes you get scars from smallpox, okay? And you are technically, yes, you are treated, but you are living with the scars from the smallpox infection, or you die, okay? Whereas with intervention B, you are either disease free or yon, smaller chances of partial treatment or smaller chances of dying. Okay, so majority probability becomes disease free. Okay, intervention A, if it's only supportive treatment, is much smaller than intervention B if you're going to pay for vaccines for vaccinating everyone with smallpox. Okay, but because the disease free is the ideal terminal node or the terminal outcome, the payoff, we prefer choosing intervention B. Okay. The same can be said about, let's see. Okay, let's have a vaccine. Okay, so one vaccine uh, is $20. Another vaccine is $18. Okay, but with vaccine B, you have a 97% chance of being disease free, and the rest of it is either partial treatment or dead, because again no treatment gives 100% coverage or 100% protection. Okay, whereas with vaccine A, which is costs yan, let's not, wag nang $18, $15 na, you only have 70% disease free And the rest, partially they are able to fight off the disease, but they have long-term consequences. So if it's 70% here, let's say around 25% here, okay? So 5% will turn up dead, okay? So you have to make a choice on why vaccine B is better, even if it's only 5%. Again, that's a loaded yung only na yun, yung 5%. Only 5%. Eh what if that 5% includes your loved ones, di ba? So outcomes must be mutually exclusive, okay? So disease-free, partial treatment or dead or partial recovery, okay? Not just partial treatment. And exhaustive. So all probabilities must add up to 1. And the terminal nodes, the final outcome is actually the payoff. The branches are chance. Did the intervention lead to a cure, a partial recovery, or partial treatment? Okay. Or do they result in the worst outcome, which is either death or disability? And now we move on to the role of the government with regards to health economics. Because again, the government is in charge of the planning, the budgeting, and the regulatory mechanisms. So it holds both the carrot, so the incentives, and the stick, the penalties, to direct healthcare. So you have your incentives, which are either monetary, including the salary grade 24, which is a significantly high salary grade for rural health physicians to encourage people to take up primary care in the rural areas, or it can be non-monetary. So an example of a non-monetary incentive is increasing excise taxes on tobacco products and alcoholic beverages. And most economists believe that all problems can be fixed using a proper incentive scheme. Okay, so an incentive is usually when we're training for a desired behavior, and the perverse incentive is when it's cultivating a behavior that is undesired. Okay, so for example, making um, products cheaper, okay, including junk food, is a perverse incentive that encourages unhealthy eating habits, and that will lead to non-communicable diseases. Okay? So, in terms of regulation and incentives, there is a reason why substance abuse or dependence is treated as a moral problem, as a crime, rather than as a health problem. Because in the cold hard lens of economics, it's more expensive to have treatment centers, to have substance abuse centers, than for our society to just do talk hang, to just summarily execute alleged drug addicts on the streets. Okay? That's the if you look at it from a cold hard lens, it's more efficient to just jail drug addicts than it is to treat them for the health problem that substance dependence and substance abuse and substance addiction is. Which leads us to the next slide. Which leads us to the question, is health economics ethical? And I am going to restart my video because I need you to have a human face to look at when we discuss this. Health economics focuses on society rather than individuals, and we look at the abstract of numbers rather than the human experience. It looks at the concepts, or it takes into account the concepts of acceptable losses and acceptable risks. So it's okay for the affected population of people with HIV or AIDS, for 1% of them to die, okay? If when you look at it from an economist lens, because this is the most efficient use of resources. However, the health economists would also argue that there's while theirs is utilitarian, okay, in its approach, there's a lot of utilitarianism here. The other alternatives are less ethical because they are less transparent for rationing healthcare. Okay, consider other ways that do not use an economic lens for with the limited resources for rationing healthcare. So, for example, let's talk about a drug that can be used for type 2 diabetes mellitus. So, the national government will say, oh, we will buy it, but it will only mostly be available to people who live in highly urbanized areas. We don't care about those living in rural areas, much less those um, who are members of indigenous populations. And then finally, let's talk about the main source of this lecture, the one who wrote the textbook on economics, okay, J. Bhattacharya, a prominent economist, one who took up his medical degree in Stanford and his PhD in Stanford University, and graduated in 1997 for the former, and finished his doctoral dissertation and graduated with a degree in health economics in 2000. Okay, so he's the main source for this lecture. His textbook I used. He is the 18th director of the U.S. National Institutes of Health. He is the acting director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control from February to March 2026. And he is also a well-known vaccine skeptic and the co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration on COVID-19. And recently, a CDC paper regarding how the COVID-19 vaccines were beneficial and saved a lot of lives was delayed in release personally by J. Bhattacharya under the excuse that he was concerned about the methodology. It's easy to get lost in the seeming soullessness of the discipline of health economics. However, as future medical professionals, you need to be equipped in defending the best health choices and understanding the viewpoints of those who are from different fields, and to protect patients and healthcare from those with a mastery in business administration on health. Wink, wink. Okay? Who see health as a profitable venture. Because remember, when private equities take over health facilities, patient mortality significantly rises. You have to learn this because private equity increases emergency department mortality, patient care experience worsens after private equity acquisition of hospitals. And while these are American studies, don't ever believe for 1 second that this is not happening in the Philippines. Multiple hospitals are already owned by few corporations, by certain corporations. Some of them more prominent, okay? It is your moral obligation and duty to be able to go toe to toe against finance bros, economists, and business administrators to ensure healthcare remains healthcare. Okay? Emphasis on health, emphasis on care. So now that we're done with the economic system, let's talk about the financing system. And the financing system in healthcare is a framework that allows funds from investors, whether private or public, to flow to borrowers and enterprises that require capital for projects, operations, and innovations. So from a public sector point of view, it is how the government is able to raise revenue, which is usually through taxes, and in the private sector, how a business is able to generate income through sales of commodities or performing services. What is the difference between health financing versus health budgeting? So financing is how you raise money to spend for healthcare, which is where is the money going to come from? Is it going to come from taxes, out of pocket, or do you pay private premiums to private insurance or to HMOs that are automatically for HMOs automatically deducted from your salary, or does it come from charity or donors such as GoFundMe, the Malasakit program, guarantee letters from your legislators? Whereas in budgeting, where you allocate money in the health sector or how the money is going to be spent, whether it with personnel, with equipment, with reagents, medication, supplies, or commodities, or infrastructure. We talked about this in our health administration discussion in the previous, or if you're doing this first in the next lecture or in the next module. So in the ASEAN, you will notice that the current health expenditure as percent of our gross domestic product, the Philippines is relatively high, okay, compared to its neighbors, okay. So relatively high yung percentage as a measure of how much we spend on health compared to our gross domestic product. However, the current health expenditure per capita, we are in the bottom half, okay, of our ASEAN neighbors. Why? Because we will find out in the next slide, okay? So it seems high as a percent of gross domestic product per capita. However, it is low. And then we are again in the bottom half with the domestic general government health expenditure as percent of current health expenditure. Okay? Whereas out of pocket as percent of current health expenditure range from lowest to highest. So that means out of pocket percentage, we are in the bottom half, so relatively high yung out of pocket expenditure. So current health expenditure as percent of gross domestic product is mostly from out of pocket expenditure. That's why it is yun. So as it turns out, the percentage of current health expenditure is not a good indicator. Perhaps the better indicator is how much of our healthcare is still out of pocket. Okay? So for health financing in the Philippines, from 2020 to 2022, there was a general increase in our national government expenditure, no doubt brought on by the Bayanihan Act with regards to COVID-19, okay? And there was also a increase in our HMOs and private health insurance and modest increase in the local government, okay? But when you look at it, while there was a decrease from 2020 to 2021 of our out of pocket, it went back up to the usual numbers with regards to households, just means household out of pocket expenditures. Okay, this despite RA 1066 Section 7 of the Universal Healthcare Act. These services and packages shall be reviewed annually to determine their financial sustainability and relevance to health innovations with the end in view of quality assurance, increased benefits, and reduced out-of-pocket expenditure. Okay? So, with regards to national government, DOH procurement of that this usually includes the DOH procurement of drugs, reagents, equipments, salary of personnel and infrastructure, but it can also include guarantee letters and the Malasakit program. And for 2024, the current state, the latest in our state of health financing in the Philippines, you will notice, of course, that household out-of-pocket payment is still at a 42.7, although thankfully there is a general large government scheme and contributory healthcare financing scheme. So, yan, larger share of the government. And then you have your private health insurance, so voluntary healthcare payment schemes or HMOs. Okay, and as percentage share of uh, total health expenditure to gross domestic product, it's now at 5.9%, which is above the WHO's recommendation of 5% of GDP. These are the sources for this lecture. I didn't include the J. Bhattacharya textbook. Okay, I will see you in the Q&A.